Chosen one, God doesn't want you leaving the house on Friday. Stay in. There are moments in life when heaven sends no explanation, only a whisper. You may feel the urge to go, to move, to step outside, but deep in your spirit you sense a pause, a tightening, a holy restraint. This is not fear speaking. This is the voice that parted seas, shut lions' mouths, and commanded storms to still. This Friday is not just another day, it is an appointed hour, marked in the unseen, sealed in the ancient patterns of God. There are things outside your door that your eyes cannot see, but your spirit can discern. And the one who formed you is saying, stay in, do not step outside. For what you think is just a simple choice of movement is in fact a crossing into a battlefield you were never meant to fight. The safest place this Friday is not the busiest street or the most familiar path. It is the place where obedience meets divine protection. Behind your door, under his covering, in the center of his will. The appointed time and the unseen trap. There are days that pass like sand through our fingers, ordinary and unremarkable, and then there are days stamped with a weight you cannot explain. They feel different in your spirit, heavier, sharper, more alert, as if the air itself is charged. This is what the ancient prophets understood when they spoke of appointed times. These were not mere points on a calendar, but intersections between heaven's order and earth's unfolding. This Friday is one of those intersections. On the surface, it will look like any other day, people rushing to work, markets opening, streets buzzing, but in the spiritual realm, something will shift. It is a day marked in the unseen for a confrontation, a snare, a setup the enemy has been preparing. And because you are chosen, you are not called to walk blindly into it. You are called to hear the warning and heed the voice. The trap the enemy lays is rarely obvious. He does not place it in plain sight, where it would be easy for you to step around. No, he weaves it into what looks safe, ordinary, even necessary. A meeting you planned, an errand you need to run, a friend inviting you out. But woven into that seemingly harmless moment is an intersection you're not meant to reach. You see, the enemy studies patterns. He watches movements, learns your timing, and waits for the moment when your path will cross his. And if he has been waiting for a Friday, and heaven knows it, the Spirit will speak. That whisper you feel, the hesitation, the nudge to stay home, is not coincidence. It is divine intelligence intercepting enemy plans. From the earliest pages of Scripture, we see that God appoints times for his people to remain in place. There was a night in Egypt when God told Israel, "Do not step outside your doors until morning." That command was not based on fear, but on reality. An angel of death was moving through the streets. The safest place was under the covering of obedience. And so it is with you. This Friday carries something you do not see, but God has already seen. He is calling you to remain within the hedge he has drawn for you. It may feel inconvenient. It may frustrate you. But divine protection often looks like divine interruption. Understand this. There are two types of appointed times, those set by God for your blessing, and those set by the enemy for your destruction. When you are in covenant with God, he will interrupt your steps to ensure you miss the enemy's appointment. What feels like a delay or denial is actually a rerouting away from disaster. If you force your way past that pause, if you ignore that restraint, you may arrive on time for a meeting heaven never meant you to attend, and there are consequences for showing up where God has not called you. This is why you cannot live by what you see. You must live by what you hear in the Spirit. The unseen realm is more real than the visible. Wars are fought there, destinies are shaped there, and traps are set there. Every trap the enemy lays begins in that invisible space before it manifests on earth. This is why when God tells you not to go, he is not speaking from guesswork. He is speaking from absolute knowledge of what is waiting for you on the other side of the door. We have grown accustomed to ignoring that voice. We say, "It's probably nothing," or "I'm overthinking." But the enemy thrives on a distracted people, those too busy, too logical, too sure to pause and ask, Lord, is this from you? This Friday is not the time to test God by running into a place he told you to avoid. This Friday is the time to lean into his voice as if your very life depends on it, because it just might. Think of Jonah. God appointed him to Nineveh, but when Jonah ran the opposite way, he found himself in the belly of a storm. The sea did not rage without cause. It was stirred by the hand of God to bring Jonah back into alignment. Now imagine the opposite. Instead of running away from where God sent you, you run toward where he told you not to go. What storms might you awaken? What traps might you trigger? The storm is not always the proof that the devil is against you. Sometimes it is proof that you ignored God's protection. The appointed time is not only about avoiding danger, it is also about preserving destiny. The enemy's traps are rarely just about harming your body. They are designed to derail your calling, to shake your confidence, to plant seeds of fear or bitterness that will grow into strongholds. One wrong place at the wrong time can alter the course of years. God's warning to stay in this Friday is about more than survival. It's about keeping you in the flow of your divine assignment. You are chosen, which means you are targeted, but it also means you are guarded if you stay under the covering. In the ancient world, a watchman stood on the city walls, scanning the horizon for signs of threat. When he saw danger coming, he blew the shofar to alert the people. The people's survival depended on whether they heeded the sound. Right now, your spirit is hearing the blast of that shofar. It's telling you, do not leave the house this Friday. You may never see the threat. You may never know the specifics. But when the danger passes, you will thank God you stayed behind the wall. We live in an age where people are obsessed with freedom and choice. But the highest form of freedom is the ability to obey the one who sees what you cannot. Every great deliverance in Scripture was preceded by an instruction that seemed small, strange, or unnecessary. Build an ark. Mark your door with blood. March around the city walls. Stay in your house on this night. The small instruction is the doorway to the great deliverance. So when the sun rises on Friday and your plans seem set, pause. Ask the Spirit, listen, and if he says, stay home, do not argue, do not reason, do not think you know better. What you think you are missing in the world will be nothing compared to what you could lose by ignoring his voice. The appointed time is not just about a date, it's about alignment. To be in the right place at the right time is blessing. To be in the wrong place at the wrong time is disaster. This Friday, your right place is behind the door, under the covering, in the will of God. And when you obey, you will not just avoid the unseen trap. You will step into the unseen blessing that follows those who walk in the fear of the Lord. The mystery of the Shabbat hedge from the very first chapters of creation, God established rhythms, not just for the movement of the stars or the change of seasons, but for the beating of our hearts and the ordering of our days. On the seventh day he rested, not because he was weary, but because he was setting a pattern for all creation, a time to cease from striving, to dwell, to be covered. For Israel, that rhythm took form in the Shabbat, beginning Friday at sundown and stretching until the next evening. But beneath the surface of this rest was a mystery few truly grasp, a hedge, a barrier, a supernatural wall of protection woven into time itself. The Shabbat was more than a religious tradition, it was a shield. When God told his people to remain in their dwellings, he was not merely enforcing a ceremonial pause. He was marking off sacred territory in the realm of time. Just as the walls of Jerusalem separated the holy city from the outside world, the appointed hours of Shabbat separated God's people from the chaos beyond the hedge. From sundown on Friday, the world outside could rage, enemies could plot, Storms could swell, but within the hedge God's covering rested. The one who kept the Shabbat was not simply keeping a command, they were stepping into an invisible fortress. The hedge was more than physical safety, it was spiritual insulation. In those hours your soul was withdrawn from the constant noise of the world and brought under the stillness of God's presence. You could hear him more clearly. You could discern his whispers, and in the unseen realm the enemy's reach was limited. You were inside the fence line of the Almighty's appointment. This is why throughout history, whenever God's people neglected the Shabbat, they didn't just lose a day of rest. They weakened the hedge, left gaps in the wall, and opened themselves to attacks they never saw coming. You see, the Shabbat hedge is not bound by geography. It is not simply about where you are. It's about when you are in alignment with God's timing. That is why the call to stay in this Friday carries weight. It is not coincidence. It is an echo of the same principle that protected Israel for centuries. Stay within the appointed time, stay within the appointed space. When you cross the threshold without his leading, you are stepping beyond the hedge into uncovered territory. Consider the night of the first Passover in Egypt. God told his people not to leave their houses until morning, for the destroyer was passing through. The blood on their doorposts was a covering, but so was the timing of their obedience. They were inside their homes during the appointed hours when judgment fell on the land. Had they stepped outside early, had they ignored the instruction, the covering would not have held. The Shabbat hedge operates on the same principle. Safety is found not merely in faith, but in the obedience that keeps you within the hedge at the appointed time. In ancient villages, hedges were planted as living fences to keep out predators and mark boundaries. A hedge was not always tall, but it was thick, thorned, and impenetrable to those who did not belong inside. The Shabbat is God's hedge, thick with his promises, thorned with his warnings, and impenetrable to the schemes of darkness for those who stay within it. This is why the enemy works tirelessly to pull you out of your place on the very days you are meant to be still. He knows that outside the hedge you are exposed. Some might say, but that's Old Testament law. I'm not under that anymore. But the principle of the hedge is not bound to the law. It is woven into creation itself. Even Jesus, who walked in perfect freedom, honored the appointed times. He stepped into the synagogue on the Shabbat, not out of legalism, but because he lived in alignment with the Father's rhythm. He understood the power of being in the right place at the right time under the Father's covering. And here's the mystery: the hedge is not just for protection, it is for preparation. Inside the Shabbat hedge, God readies you for what lies beyond it. The stillness of the hedge is where you receive strategies, where your spirit is sharpened, where your discernment is refined. When you break the hedge prematurely, you rob yourself of the preparation you need to face what's outside. That is why this Friday's instruction to stay in is not simply about avoiding danger. It is about equipping you for the next step in your assignment. When the hedge is strong, you can stand against storms. But if you weaken it by restlessness, disobedience, or neglect, you will find yourself unprepared. The enemy knows this and often tempts God's people with urgency, calls, invitations, sudden needs that demand you step outside at the very moment you are meant to remain still. But those urgencies are often bait. The Shabbat hedge is where you learn to say, "Not now. God has called me to remain within his timing." In the unseen realm, angels stand watch at the hedge. Scripture speaks of the encamping of angels around those who fear him. That encampment is not random. It is positioned at the borders of obedience. Inside the hedge, they guard you. Outside it, you step into contested territory. This is why some battles are never fought simply because you never showed up for them. You stayed behind the hedge and let God fight unseen wars on your behalf. This is also why the hedge is a test of trust. Do you trust that God sees what you cannot? Do you believe that his stay is as much a blessing as his go? The Shabbat hedge teaches you that not every victory is won by movement. Some are won by stillness. The walls of Jericho fell after 7 days of marching, but the deliverance from Egypt began with a single night of staying inside. So as this Friday approaches, remember the mystery of the hedge. The instruction to remain indoors is not superstition. It is alignment with an ancient principle of divine protection. The same God who wove rest into creation has woven this moment into your timeline. The hedge is already set. The covering is already in place. But the choice is yours. Will you stay within it, or will you step beyond the boundary and into the chaos that waits? If you remain, you will not only avoid the enemy's snare, you will also emerge strengthened, sharpened, and prepared for the next appointed time. The hedge is not a prison, it is a sanctuary. It is the fortress where God shields you from the arrows that fly by day and the terrors that stalk by night. And when the sun sets on Friday and you are still within its shelter, you will know this truth in your spirit. The hedge is where the chosen are kept until the day their destiny calls them forward. Delayed blessing for greater purpose, one of the hardest lessons for the chosen to learn, is that God's timing is not our timing. We live in a world that worships immediacy, instant answers, instant gratification, instant results. But in the kingdom, the greatest blessings often arrive wrapped in delay. This is not because God is slow, nor because he has forgotten you, but because he is weaving your story into something far greater than you can presently see. When he tells you to pause, to wait, to stay behind, it is not a denial. It is a divine positioning. What feels like a closed door is often a hidden gate that will open only when the hour is right. This Friday, when he tells you not to step outside, it may feel like he is holding something from you. You may have plans, obligations, opportunities, but God sees the full map, every street, every intersection, every unseen trap. And he also sees every blessing he has prepared for you, blessings that require you to be in the right place at the right time. If you rush ahead of his timing, you might arrive too early before the provision is ready. Or worse, you may arrive at a place meant for you in a future season, but find it empty, hostile, or dangerous now. Consider Joseph, sold into slavery by his own brothers. His dream was real, his calling sure, yet God allowed years of delay before Joseph stood in Pharaoh's court. At every step, Joseph could have mistaken the delay for abandonment, but each season of waiting was strategic. Potiphar's house taught him administration, the prison taught him stewardship of influence, and the final summons to Pharaoh came at the exact moment Egypt needed his gift. Had Joseph forced the door early, he would have walked into a palace unprepared and into a famine unready to be solved. When God delays, it is never without purpose. The delay is often the very thing that makes the blessing possible. Think of David, anointed as king while still a shepherd boy. He was chosen, yet God kept him in the fields long after the oil ran down his head. Why? Because the palace was not ready for him, and he was not yet ready for the palace. The delay was his training ground, his shield, his refinement. The same God who positioned David at the right time will position you at the right time if you can endure the pause. The danger of ignoring divine delay is that you may forfeit the fullness of what God intends. Blessings have seasons just like fruit. Pick them too early, and they are sour, unready, and unable to nourish you. Wait for the right moment, and they are sweet, sustaining, and abundant. This Friday's instruction to stay in is not just about avoiding harm. It may also be about ensuring you are home when the right opportunity knocks, the right message arrives, the right divine connection is made. Stepping out prematurely could mean missing what is coming directly to your door. Scripture shows again and again that God's timing is bound to his purposes. The Israelites, after leaving Egypt, were told to camp at certain places, often waiting days before moving on. Why? Because their journey was not only about reaching the promised land, it was about arriving there in the fullness of God's plan, prepared to take possession. When they moved ahead of his command, they walked into defeat. But when they waited for his timing, they moved under his covering, and the victories were theirs. In the same way, when God delays your movement, he is securing your future. The very thing you think you're missing out on may be something that would harm you if you reached it now. Or perhaps he is aligning other people, other places, and other events so that when you step out, every detail fits like pieces of a divine puzzle. If you step out too soon, the pieces will not align, and what should have been effortless will become a struggle. Even Jesus embraced divine delay. When his friend Lazarus fell sick, Jesus waited 2 more days before going to him. From the outside, it looked like negligence, even cruelty, but the delay was deliberate, so that the miracle would not be a healing, but a resurrection. God's delays often enlarge the testimony. What could have been a small blessing becomes an undeniable display of his power because you waited. This Friday's stay could be the very pause that transforms a simple provision into a supernatural one. The chosen must learn to view delay as a gift. It is a shield from premature exposure. It is a hedge against unseen traps. It is also a magnifier of blessing. What comes later often comes fuller, richer, and more complete than what would have come earlier. The enemy wants you to despise delay because he knows impatience is one of the quickest ways to step out of covering. But if you can learn to rest in delay, you disarm one of his most effective weapons. This is not to say waiting is easy. Everything in your flesh will want to move, to do, to act. People may not understand why you decline an invitation or cancel plans. You may even face ridicule for listening to an unseen voice. But the ones who mock your delay will not be there to bear the cost of your disobedience. Only you will. The choice to obey, especially when you do not fully understand, is the mark of those who walk closely with God. And here is the deeper mystery. Sometimes the delay is not only for your sake, but for the sake of someone else's salvation, deliverance, or blessing. Your absence from a certain place at a certain time could protect another life. Your stillness could prevent a chain of events that would have rippled harm through more lives than your own. In the kingdom, obedience is never isolated. It is always part of a larger web of God's purposes. So when Friday comes and the voice says stay in, remember this: you are not being denied. You are being aligned. The pause is a placement. The delay is a doorway that has not yet swung open, because what is behind it is still being prepared. And when it does open, you will step through not half ready or half protected, but in the fullness of God's timing, power, and provision. Do not confuse movement with progress. Progress in the kingdom often happens in the stillness. The ark was built over decades of waiting. The upper room held the disciples for days before the Spirit fell. The early church often received its most powerful instructions during seasons of pause. Delay is not the enemy of destiny. It is the servant of destiny. The one who can embrace delay without resentment has understood a rare truth. God's not yet is as holy as his go now. This Friday, his not yet is a shield. It is a positioning for something greater than you can see today. And when the blessing comes, you will look back and realize the delay was not an interruption. It was the invisible hand of God guiding you toward the moment you were created for. The covering of obedience, there is a shelter no storm can breach, no arrow can pierce, no darkness can infiltrate. The covering of obedience, it is not made of brick or stone, but of alignment with the will of God. You cannot buy it, build it, or borrow it. You can only walk into it by hearing his voice and doing what he says. Every chosen one must understand this. Safety is not found in the strength of walls, the size of weapons, or the familiarity of the place. It is found in being exactly where God told you to be, and sometimes that command is not to go anywhere at all. Sometimes the safest place is the place you do not leave. When God says stay, his words create a barrier in the unseen. Angels are assigned, boundaries are drawn, and a hedge is set up around you. To obey is to remain under that canopy. To disobey is to step into open territory. Out there, you may be in the same street you walked yesterday, the same market you've visited 100 times, but in the spirit you are unshielded, exposed, and vulnerable. The enemy does not need new weapons. He only needs you outside the covering. Obedience is not always logical. In fact, it rarely is. Noah was told to build a boat on dry land before a drop of rain had ever fallen. Joshua was told to march silently around Jericho instead of attacking it. The widow of Zarephath was told to feed Elijah her last meal in the middle of a famine. And the Israelites were told to stay in their homes on the night of Passover, even though they might have felt safer watching the streets. In every case, the instructions seemed small compared to the danger. But the small act of obedience opened a door for supernatural deliverance. This Friday's call to stay inside is no different. You may think, what harm could it be? It's just one evening. I'll be careful. But obedience is not about whether you can manage the risk. It's about whether you will trust the one who sees beyond it. You cannot negotiate the boundaries of his protection. The covering is set where he says, not where you feel comfortable. If he tells you to stay, that is the only safe place on earth for you in that moment. The covering of obedience does not mean danger will never approach you. It means danger will not touch you without permission. Think of the 3 Hebrew boys in Babylon. They obeyed God by refusing to bow to the idol, and their obedience did not prevent them from being thrown into the fire, but it brought the presence of the 4th man into the flames. The covering is not the absence of the trial, it is the presence of God within it. Sometimes staying under the covering means staying in the exact place he told you, even if the world outside is shaking. One of the greatest lies of the enemy is that disobedience is harmless as long as it is just this once. But the enemy doesn't need you to live in rebellion. He only needs you to step outside the covering for one moment at the exact time he has planned. That is why appointed times matter. When you ignore God's timing, you unknowingly walk into the enemy's. You step from a place where angels stand guard into a place where the enemy's net is already spread. The covering of obedience is also a place of peace. The world can rage outside, but when you are inside his will, there is a stillness that cannot be shaken. The Israelites in Egypt heard the cries of the Egyptians on that Passover night, but within their homes there was light, protection, and safety. The blood on their doors was the mark of their obedience, and it formed an invisible wall that the destroyer could not cross. The same God who shielded them then still shields his people now, but only those who stay under the covering. Disobedience is costly not only for you, but for those connected to you. Jonah's refusal to go where God sent him brought a storm upon an entire ship of innocent sailors. In the same way, your decision to step out from the covering can ripple beyond you, drawing others into battles they were never meant to fight. The chosen carry weight in the Spirit. Where you go, you bring either the blessing of obedience or the vulnerability of rebellion. Obedience is not passive, it is active trust. To stay home when God says stay is not doing nothing, it is standing guard in the Spirit. It is choosing to align yourself with His command rather than your convenience. It is declaring that His voice holds greater authority over your steps than your own plans, impulses, or reasoning. And in the realm of the Spirit, that choice is like sealing your door with His name. Some people misunderstand obedience as God controlling them, restricting their freedom, but obedience is not about restriction, it is about preservation. A shepherd doesn't keep sheep in the pen at night to punish them, he does it because wolves hunt in the dark. The chosen one, who understands this no longer, resists the pen but cherishes it, knowing that the same walls that keep you in also keep danger out. The beauty of the covering of obedience is that it not only shields you from harm, it also positions you for blessing. Often, while you are stuck in the place you thought was holding you back, God is bringing the blessing to you. The Israelites didn't have to chase the manna in the wilderness, it came to their camp. The disciples in the upper room didn't have to go looking for the Spirit. It filled the place where they were sitting. If you step out from the covering too soon, you might miss the very thing God was sending directly to your door. The covering also teaches you to recognize His voice more clearly. Every time you obey the nudge to stay, to wait, to pause, your spirit becomes more attuned to His direction. And the more you walk in obedience, the more you will see the pattern. How every stay was protection, every wait was preparation, every not yet was an act of love. The covering of obedience is not a one-time act, it is a lifestyle. So when Friday comes and the Spirit says, "Do not go out," understand the weight of that instruction. You are not simply declining an outing, you are choosing to remain under the shadow of the Almighty. You are stepping into the fortress where His faithfulness is your shield and rampart. You are aligning yourself with the God who sees the end from the beginning, the God who is not guessing about the danger, but has already measured it, intercepted it, and made a way around it for you, if you will stay under His covering. When the morning after comes and you realize that nothing dramatic happened, no near miss, no visible danger, you may be tempted to think the warning was unnecessary, but that's the nature of the covering. When it works, you will never see what it saved you from. The absence of disaster is the proof of its power, and the gratitude you feel in that moment will remind you why obedience is never wasted. In the days to come, you will face many such moments, times when God calls you to move and times when He calls you to remain. Both are equally holy when they are rooted in obedience. This Friday is a test, but it is also an invitation to trust Him not only with your destiny, but with your daily steps. For the chosen one, obedience is not an occasional act. It is the constant posture of a life lived under the covering of the Most High. And under that covering, no snare, no arrow, no unseen trap can touch you. The prophetic call to remain behind the door. There are moments in history when God calls His people to move, to march, to step out in faith. And then there are moments when His command is the opposite. Do not move. Do not step beyond the threshold. These moments are not about inactivity. They are about alignment. They are about remaining in the place where heaven's protection meets earth's obedience. This Friday is one of those moments. It is a prophetic echo, a shadow of an ancient pattern, a whisper from the God who sees the future and calls His own to stay behind the door until the appointed time. From the night of the first Passover in Egypt to the upper room in Jerusalem, history is marked by times when the chosen were commanded to remain inside. On the night judgment swept through Egypt, God's instruction was simple but absolute. Do not go out of the door until morning. Outside, death moved from house to house. Inside, under the covering of the blood and the word, there was light, peace, and preservation. The door became the dividing line between life and death, not because it was made of wood, but because it was sealed with obedience. The prophetic call to remain behind the door is not about fear, it is about discernment. God does not hide His people because they are weak. He hides them because they are valuable. A king does not parade his most precious treasures in the open during a siege. He locks them away in the innermost chamber until the threat passes. When God tells you to stay in, He is not diminishing your strength. He is preserving your assignment. What makes this call prophetic is that it is not simply for your own safety. Often, God hides you so that His timing, His plans, and His glory can be revealed in the right moment. Consider the disciples after the crucifixion. Jesus had told them to wait in Jerusalem until they were clothed with power from on high. They stayed behind closed doors, not because they understood everything, but because they trusted the voice of the one who had never led them astray. And when the day of Pentecost came, the Spirit did not look for them in the marketplace or the fields. He came to the very place where they had been told to wait. The danger of ignoring this prophetic call is that you step into a moment that was never assigned to you. The enemy is a master of timing. He knows that the chosen are most vulnerable not when they are in open rebellion, but when they are in mild disobedience, just far enough outside the covering to be unprotected, but close enough to think they are safe. He waits for the night you dismiss the nudge, the moment you say, "It's probably nothing," and then the snare springs shut. Remaining behind the door is not weakness, it is warfare. In the unseen realm, your obedience shuts gates the enemy planned to use against you. When you stay in, you disrupt his timing, you miss the intersection where his trap was laid. To you, it feels like you just skipped an outing. In the spirit, you have just sidestepped an ambush. The enemy plans his attacks for certain coordinates in time and space. God's prophetic call to stay in removes you from that coordinate entirely. You are no longer on his battlefield. The door itself is symbolic. In Scripture, the door represents transition, threshold, and access. Jesus called himself the door, the only true access point to the Father. When you remain behind the door he has marked for you, you are not trapped. You are secured in him. That door becomes a boundary line the enemy cannot cross without divine permission. On the night of the first Passover, the destroyer could not cross the threshold marked by the blood. On this Friday, the same principle stands. The door God tells you to stay behind is sealed not with lamb's blood, but with the blood of the Lamb. There is also an intimacy in staying behind the door. The outside world is loud, restless, and unrelenting. Inside, in the stillness, you can hear his voice with greater clarity. God often hides you not only to protect you from danger, but to reveal something to you that you could not hear in the noise. Moses received the law on the mountain alone. Elijah heard the still small voice on the mountain alone. John received the revelation on the island alone. The door is not only a shield, it is a veil behind which God speaks. The prophetic call to remain behind the door is also a test of trust. Can you believe that God's stay is just as much a blessing as his go? Can you trust him when he asks you to remain still while the world moves on? This is where many stumble. They mistake stillness for stagnation. But in God's kingdom, stillness can be the most strategic movement of all. You are not losing ground, you are holding the ground he has given you. There will always be a temptation to open the door early. Curiosity, restlessness, pressure from others, all of these can make the command to stay feel unreasonable. But think of Noah. God sealed him inside the ark before the first drop of rain fell, and he did not step out until the waters had receded. The sealing was not imprisonment, it was preservation. Had he opened the door before the appointed time, he would have stepped into floodwaters meant to bury him. Sometimes God calls you behind the door not because of what is happening outside, but because of what is happening inside you. Behind the door is where he works on your heart, sharpens your discernment, heals your wounds, and prepares your hands for the work ahead. It is a refining chamber, a holy waiting room. If you open the door too soon, you step out half, formed half, healed half, ready. But if you wait, you step out in the fullness of what he has prepared in you. The prophetic call to remain behind the door is rarely understood by those outside. They will question you, mock you, try to lure you out. They may tell you you're overreacting, that nothing is wrong, but you are not listening to them. You are listening to the one who sees the end from the beginning. And when the moment passes and you are untouched, you will know that it was his voice that kept you. This Friday, when the Spirit says, "Do not leave the house, see it for what it is," a continuation of a pattern God has used for generations to guard his people, it is your Passover night. It is your upper room moment. It is your sealing in the ark. The door is not a barrier to your destiny. It is the gateway through which you will emerge at the exact moment God has appointed. So remain behind the door until the morning light. Remain under the covering of his word. Remain in the place where the enemy cannot touch you. For outside the battle may rage unseen, but inside the blood has been applied, the door has been shut, and the God of angel armies stands watch. And when the appointed hour comes, he will open the door himself, and you will step into a world where the danger has passed, the trap has failed, and the blessing is waiting, because you stayed when he told you to stay.